My name is Melisande, and I'm 27 years old. After graduating college, I moved back home to save money while job hunting. It seemed like the smart financial decision at the time. I never imagined my own parents would use my situation against me, threatening to double my rent unless I became my sister's full-time unpaid nanny. What happened next changed our family forever. Where are you watching from today? If you're new here, please hit that like and subscribe button to join our community. I promise you'll want to see how this story ends. College graduation day should have felt like a triumph. Standing there in my cap and gown, finance degree in hand, I smiled for the photos while mentally calculating the mountain of student loan debt I'd accumulated. My parents beamed with pride, especially my father James, who had always encouraged my academic pursuits. My mother Diane seemed more relieved than anything else. My 16-year-old sister Samantha was busy texting throughout the ceremony, barely looking up when my name was called. That evening, during our celebration dinner at my favorite restaurant, my father raised his glass. To Melisande, the first college graduate in our family. We always knew you'd make us proud. My mother nodded in agreement, though her enthusiasm seemed more measured. Now comes the hard part, finding a job that makes all that tuition worthwhile. I'd already been thinking about this, of course. The job market for finance graduates was competitive, and living costs in our city had skyrocketed during my 4 years at university. Most of my classmates were moving back home temporarily to save money, and after much consideration, I decided to do the same. Actually, I said, setting down my fork, I wanted to talk to you both about that. Would it be possible for me to move back home for a little while, just until I find a stable job and save enough for a security deposit on my own place? My parents exchanged glances. My father spoke first. Of course you can, honey. It's your home. My mother was more practical. We'd need you to contribute something toward expenses. Nothing extravagant, just enough to cover your share of utilities and groceries. Absolutely, I agreed quickly. I can pay rent. I've already applied for several entry-level positions, and I'm doing some freelance financial consulting to bring in income. And you'll help around the house, my mother pressed. Samantha has so many activities, and your father and I both work full-time. Of course, I promised. I'll do my share. Looking back now, I should have asked for specifics. I should have requested a written agreement outlining exactly what helping around the house entailed. But at 22, filled with optimism about my future and relief at having a solution to my immediate housing concerns, I didn't think to protect myself from my own family. 2 weeks later, I moved back into my childhood bedroom. The pale blue walls were still decorated with my high school achievement certificates and awards from math competitions. It felt strange returning to this space as an adult. I spent the first day reorganizing everything, making it feel less like a shrine to my teenage self, and more like a functional space for a working adult. My father James worked as a senior manager at a technology company. He spent most evenings hunched over his laptop finishing reports or preparing for the next day's meetings. We'd always been close when I was growing up. He'd taught me how to build my first budget spreadsheet when I was 12 and encouraged my interest in finance. Since I'd moved back home, though, our conversations had become more perfunctory. How was your day? Fine, yours? Busy? This new project is killing me. Nothing deeper than that. My mother Diane worked in retail sales at a high-end department store. She'd always been more emotionally distant, practical, rather than affectionate. She kept our household running with military precision, her day planner filled with everyone's schedules and appointments. While she'd been proud of my academic achievements, we never had the kind of relationship where we shared secrets or even spent much time together by choice. Then there was Samantha, my younger sister by 11 years. The age gap meant we'd never been particularly close, and by the time she was old enough for us to potentially bond, I was heading off to college. Samantha had always been the family princess, indulged and coddled in ways I never was. Whether it was because she was the baby of the family or simply had a different personality than mine, I couldn't say. But the disparity in how we were treated had created a quiet resentment in me that I tried to suppress. Within a month of moving back home, I landed a position at a financial technology startup. The salary was modest, but the potential for growth seemed promising. I dutifully paid my agreed-upon rent to my parents, contributed to groceries, and did household chores on weekends. Things seemed to be working out reasonably well, though I noticed Samantha was becoming increasingly difficult. She'd entered what my mother called her challenging phase. At 16, she was skipping classes, arguing constantly with our parents, and developing friendships with kids my parents considered troublesome. I tried to stay out of the fray, focusing on establishing myself professionally and saving for my own place. I estimated I'd need another 6 months to build a sufficient financial cushion. One evening, I came home after a particularly grueling day at work. I'd been assisting with a major client presentation, and my brain felt like mush. All I wanted was a hot shower, a bowl of pasta, and mindless television. Instead, I found my parents sitting at the dining room table with matching stern expressions. "We need to talk, Melisande," my father said, his voice uncharacteristically formal. My mother gestured to the empty chair across from them. "Sit down, please." I sank into the seat, a sense of unease growing in my stomach. Had something happened? Was someone ill? "Your mother and I have been discussing your living arrangements," my father began. "Is there a problem with my rent payments?" I asked, confused. I was always punctual with my financial obligations. "No, the payments are fine," my mother said, "but we've decided that the arrangement needs to change." "Change how?" My father cleared his throat. "We're going to need to either raise your rent or have you take on additional responsibilities." "Additional responsibilities?" I repeated. My mother leaned forward. "Samantha needs supervision after school. She's been getting into trouble, her grades are slipping, and we can't be there because of our work schedules." "We're prepared to keep your rent at the current rate," my father continued, "if you agree to serve as Samantha's caretaker when she's not in school." I stared at them, trying to process what they were suggesting. "You want me to be Samantha's babysitter?" "More like a guardian," my mother corrected. "You'd need to pick her up from school, make sure she does her homework, prepare her dinner, drive her to activities, and generally ensure she stays out of trouble." "But I have a full-time job," I protested. "I can't just leave in the middle of the day to pick her up from school." My mother waved her hand dismissively. "You work for that tiny startup. Surely they can be flexible." "It's not a tiny startup. It's a growing financial technology firm, and no, they can't be flexible about me leaving during core business hours," I said, feeling a flush of anger rising in my cheeks. "I'm trying to build a career here." "Well then," my father said with a shrug that felt like a slap, "we'll need to double your rent. We're going to have to hire someone to supervise Samantha, and that's expensive." The injustice of it hit me like a physical blow. "You're giving me an ultimatum. Either I sacrifice my career to be Samantha's free nanny, or you punish me financially." "Don't be so dramatic, Melisande," my mother sighed. "We're simply asking you to contribute to this family in a meaningful way. This is how you can repay us for allowing you to live here at below market rates." "Repay you?" I echoed, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "I'm already paying rent. I'm already helping with groceries and housework. I'm an adult with my own life and career." My father looked uncomfortable but remained firm. "This is our home, and these are our terms. You need to decide if you're willing to accept them." Just then, I noticed movement in the hallway. Samantha was standing there, listening, a smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. When our eyes met, she didn't even have the decency to look embarrassed at being caught eavesdropping. Instead, she gave me a little wave, her expression almost triumphant. "Don't I get a say in this?" I asked, turning back to my parents. My mother's expression hardened. "The decision has been made, Melisande. You have until the end of the week to let us know your choice." As they stood up, signaling the end of our discussion, I remained seated, too stunned to move. My father paused briefly at the doorway, looking like he wanted to say something more, but my mother tugged at his arm and he followed her without a backward glance. I sat there alone, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. How had my sensible plan to save money transformed into this nightmare scenario? And how was I going to find a way out? The next morning, I woke up early, determined to find a solution to my impossible situation. Before leaving for work, I caught my father alone in the kitchen, hoping for a more reasonable conversation without my mother's influence. "Dad, can we talk about last night?" I asked, keeping my voice low. He glanced toward the hallway, checking if we were alone. "What about it?" "This arrangement you and Mom are proposing isn't fair. I can't be responsible for Samantha and maintain my job." He sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "Life isn't always fair, Melisande. Your mother and I are stretched thin with our work schedules, and Samantha needs supervision. I understand that, but making it my responsibility isn't the solution. What if I help out on weekends, or maybe a couple of evenings during the week?" My father shook his head. "That's not enough. Samantha needs daily supervision immediately after school. That's when she's been getting into trouble." "Then maybe you or Mom could adjust your work schedules," I suggested, "or hire a professional after-school caretaker. We can't afford that unless we increase our income, which is why we're raising your rent," he stated matter-of-factly. "So I'm just a financial solution to you." I couldn't keep the hurt from my voice. His expression softened slightly. "That's not what I meant. Look, your mother feels strongly about this. Just think about it, okay? You have until the end of the week." With that non-resolution hanging in the air, I left for work, my mind churning. During my lunch break, I pulled out my laptop and began searching for affordable apartments in the area. The numbers were sobering. Even the smallest studio apartments would consume nearly 70% of my current income, leaving little for student loan payments, transportation, food, and other necessities. I'd have to find a higher-paying job or a roommate situation, neither of which seemed immediately feasible. That evening, I tried approaching my mother, hoping to appeal to her practical nature. "Mom, I've been thinking about your proposal," I began carefully. She looked up from her planner. "And I really want to help with Samantha, but I can't do it full-time without jeopardizing my job. What if we compromise? I could cover certain days or time slots, and we could find another solution for the rest." Her expression remained unmoved. "Melisande, this isn't a negotiation. Either you help with Samantha as needed or your rent doubles. It's that simple." "But that's not fair," I protested. "Fair," she echoed with a short laugh. "Was it fair that we supported you through 4 years of college? Is it fair that we're charging you well below market value for rent? Life isn't about fairness, it's about responsibility." "I am being responsible," I insisted. "I'm working full-time, paying my bills, contributing to this household." She closed her planner with a snap. "Not enough, apparently, since we're still having to solve the Samantha problem on our own. I thought you'd be more grateful for everything we've done for you." The conversation was clearly going nowhere. Over the next few days, I continued apartment hunting without success. I approached my supervisor at work about the possibility of a raise, but was gently reminded that performance reviews weren't scheduled for another 4 months. By the end of the week, I felt trapped. I couldn't afford to move out immediately, and I couldn't afford the doubled rent. With a sense of defeat, I told my parents I would try to help with Samantha while maintaining my job. The first week was chaotic. I negotiated with my manager to work through lunch so I could leave earlier to pick up Samantha from school, but that still meant she was unsupervised for nearly an hour. When I arrived at her school that first day, she was nowhere to be found. Panicked calls revealed she'd gone to a friend's house without telling anyone. By the time I tracked her down, I was frazzled and an hour behind on an important work project. "You need to tell me where you're going," I told her firmly as we drove home. She shrugged, scrolling through her phone. "Mom and Dad never cared before." "Well, they care now, and they've put me in charge of knowing your whereabouts," I said. She looked up, her expression calculating. "But you're not Mom or Dad. I don't have to listen to you." "Actually, you do, at least until I get you home to them." She rolled her eyes. "Whatever. This arrangement is stupid anyway. I don't need a babysitter." "Then help me out here," I said, trying a different approach. "If you show Mom and Dad you can be responsible on your own, maybe they'll reconsider." For a moment, she seemed to consider this, but then her expression hardened again. "Why should I make things easier for you? You're the one who chose to move back home." The following days established a pattern. Samantha would deliberately make my job as difficult as possible, missing our agreed meeting spots, forgetting to tell me about schedule changes, taking hours to complete homework that should have taken minutes. Each time I reported these issues to my parents, they blamed my lack of authority rather than Samantha's deliberate non-cooperation. "You need to be firmer with her," my mother would say. "You need to establish clear consequences," my father would advise. But they undermined any authority I might have had by dismissing Samantha's disrespect toward me and failing to enforce any consequences themselves. Meanwhile, my work performance was suffering. I was constantly distracted, checking my phone for messages from Samantha or her school. I missed deadlines, made careless errors, and found myself apologizing to colleagues more often than not. After 3 weeks of this arrangement, my manager called me into his office. "Melisande, is everything okay?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "Your work has been slipping lately. That's not like you." I considered lying, saying everything was fine, but the pressure of the past weeks suddenly felt overwhelming. "I'm dealing with some family issues," I admitted. "My parents have essentially forced me to become my teenage sister's caretaker, and it's affecting my ability to focus." His expression was sympathetic. "I'm sorry to hear that. Is there anything we can do to help? Maybe adjust your hours temporarily?" "I don't think so," I said, feeling a lump form in my throat. "The issue is that I need to be available whenever my sister needs supervision, which is unpredictable. I'm trying to make it work, but it's been challenging." "I understand family obligations," he said kindly. "But I need to be clear, Melisande, if your performance doesn't improve soon, we'll need to reevaluate your position here. We're still a growing company, and everyone needs to pull their weight." I nodded, the knot in my stomach tightening. "I understand. I'll figure something out." Walking back to my desk, I felt a mixture of desperation and determination. Something had to change, and soon. I couldn't continue sacrificing my career for an arrangement I'd been forced into, especially when Samantha herself was actively working against me. That night, lying awake in my childhood bedroom, I began to formulate a plan. If my parents wanted to treat me like an employee rather than a daughter, perhaps it was time I gave them my resignation notice. Everything came to a head on a Wednesday afternoon. I had an important client presentation scheduled, the kind that could potentially lead to a promotion if it went well. I'd been preparing for weeks, staying up late to perfect my slides and rehearse my talking points. The meeting was set for 2:00 p.m., which meant I'd need to find someone else to pick up Samantha from school. I approached my mother the night before. "Mom, I have a critical work presentation tomorrow afternoon. Is there any way you or Dad could pick up Samantha just this once?" She barely looked up from her magazine. "You know we can't leave work in the middle of the day, Melisande. That's why you're handling Samantha's after-school care." "This is really important," I pressed. "It could mean a promotion." "Could you possibly make an exception just this once?" She sighed, setting down her reading. "This is exactly what we were afraid of. Your work taking precedence over family responsibilities." "It's not about precedence," I argued. "It's about balance. I'm asking for one afternoon." If we start making exceptions, Samantha will think the rules don't matter, my mother said firmly. You'll have to reschedule your presentation. I can't reschedule. The client is only in town tomorrow. My mother's expression remained unmoved. Then you'll have to figure something out that doesn't involve me or your father missing work. The next morning, I received a text from Samantha claiming she had a dental emergency urgent pain in a back molar. She needed to be picked up from school immediately and taken to the dentist. Panicked, I called the school, who confirmed Samantha was in the nurse's office complaining of severe tooth pain. I had no choice but to inform my manager that I had a family emergency and would miss the presentation. The disappointment on his face was evident, though he tried to hide it. Family comes first, he said, but his tone conveyed his true feelings. This was a significant setback for me professionally. I rushed to Samantha's school, mind-racing with contingency plans. Maybe I could get her settled at the dentist quickly and still make it back for at least part of the presentation. When I arrived, Samantha was sitting in the nurse's office holding her jaw and looking miserable. Let's get you to the dentist, I said, signing her out. In the car, her pain seemed to miraculously improve. Actually, she said, I think it's feeling better now. Maybe it was just something I ate. I glanced at her suspiciously. Samantha, the school nurse, said you were in agony 10 minutes ago. She shrugged. It comes and goes. Maybe we should just go home and see if it gets worse again. No, we're going to the dentist, I insisted. If you're having that much pain, we need to get it checked out. The dentist, after a thorough examination, found nothing wrong. No cavity, no infection, no impacted wisdom teeth. Everything looks perfectly healthy, he said, seeming confused by the reported symptoms. On the drive home, Samantha was suspiciously quiet. You faked it, didn't you? I finally asked. She didn't answer immediately, but her silence was confirmation enough. Do you realize what you did? I continued, anger rising in my voice. You made me miss an important presentation, something that could have advanced my career. It's not my fault you chose to live at home, she muttered. No, but it is your fault that you deliberately sabotaged my job today, I shot back. When we arrived home, Samantha immediately went to her room. I was about to follow and continue our conversation when my phone buzzed with a message from a colleague. The presentation had gone poorly in my absence. The client had been disappointed by my no-show and was reconsidering our partnership. I sat in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to process the potential career damage. After a few minutes, I went inside, intending to explain to Samantha the seriousness of her actions. But her room was empty. A quick search of the house revealed she wasn't home at all. I called her cell phone repeatedly, but she didn't answer. Finally, I received a text. At Ashley's house. Don't worry about picking me up. It was as if something snapped inside me. I drove to my office, hoping to salvage what I could of the client relationship, only to be called into my manager's office upon arrival. Melisande, we need to talk, he said gravely. This was the third client meeting you've missed or been late to in the past month. I know, and I'm so sorry, I began, but he held up a hand. I understand you're dealing with family obligations, but we need employees who can be relied upon. Consider this an official warning. If your performance and attendance don't improve immediately, we'll have to let you go. I nodded, too numb to argue. When I returned home that evening, I found my parents in the living room, both wearing expressions of disapproval. The school called. My mother began without preamble. Samantha didn't return after her dental appointment. She wasn't actually at the dentist by then, I explained tiredly. There was nothing wrong with her tooth. She faked the whole thing. Rather than being concerned about Samantha's deception, my mother focused on me. So you just let her go off on her own afterward, without supervision? I didn't let her do anything, I protested. She disappeared while I was on the phone dealing with the work crisis her fake emergency caused. This is exactly why she needs proper supervision, my father chimed in. You're clearly not managing to control her. Control her? I repeated incredulously. She's deliberately sabotaging me, and you're blaming me for it. My mother's voice was cold. We're paying thousands for her education. We can't have her skipping school and running wild. Actually, I'm the one paying now, I shot back. I'm paying with my career prospects, my mental health, and my relationship with both of you. Don't be so dramatic, my mother snapped. We've invested so much in your education, and this is how you repay us, by complaining about helping your sister for a few hours a day. The phrase caught me off guard. Invested in my education, I thought you were proud of me for earning scholarships and taking out loans. I'm the one paying for my education. My parents exchanged an uncomfortable glance. Well, of course we contributed, my father said vaguely. How much? I pressed. Because I don't remember seeing any payments from you on my tuition statements. My mother's face flushed with anger. That's not the point. The point is that we've given you everything, including a place to live now, and you act like helping with Samantha is some huge imposition. It is when it's costing me my job, I exclaimed. Today, I missed a presentation that could have meant a promotion, all because Samantha faked a tooth emergency. We've all had to make sacrifices, my father said stiffly. At that moment, Samantha walked in looking smug. What's going on? She asked, though her tone suggested she knew exactly what we were discussing. Where have you been? My mother demanded, but her voice lacked the sharp edge it had when addressing me. At Ashley's, I told Melisande. After disappearing without a word, I added. Samantha rolled her eyes. You were too busy on the phone yelling at your work people. My father turned to me. You were yelling at colleagues in front of your sister. No, I was trying to salvage a client relationship that was damaged because I had to leave work for Samantha's fake emergency. It wasn't fake, Samantha protested. My tooth really did hurt earlier. The blatant lie was the final straw. That's not what you told me in the car, and it's not what the dentist found, I said firmly. But I could see my parents were already accepting Samantha's version of events. The truth didn't matter. In their eyes, I would always be the one at fault. Later that night, as I sat in my room trying to figure out my next steps, I overheard my mother on the phone in the hallway. Yes, it's working out perfectly, she was saying to someone, her voice low but audible. We're saving a fortune on childcare. Melisande picks Samantha up from school and watches her until we get home. No, we're not paying her, she lives here rent-free. Well, not exactly free, but way below what she'd pay elsewhere. It was James's idea, actually a little financial incentive to ensure she helps out. I felt physically ill. They weren't asking me to help out with Samantha because they genuinely needed assistance. They were using financial leverage to get free childcare. My own parents were exploiting me. I quietly closed my door and sat on my bed, a strange calm settling over me. Everything was suddenly crystal clear. This wasn't about family helping family. This was about using me as a resource. And it was time I removed myself from the equation. Once I recognized the true nature of my situation, a peculiar sense of clarity emerged. I wasn't just a daughter trying to help her family during a difficult time. I was being manipulated and exploited by the very people who should have been supporting my growth and independence. With this realization came a firm resolve. I needed to leave this toxic environment, and I needed to do it in a way that protected my own interests. The next morning, I woke up early and began researching housing options more aggressively. Previous searches had focused on places within our immediate area, but I expanded my radius to neighboring cities. The commute would be longer, but the rent might be more manageable. I also reached out to former college friends, discreetly inquiring about roommate situations. By mid-morning, I had a promising lead. Emma, a friend from my finance program, had recently signed a lease on a 2-bedroom apartment in a city about 45 minutes away. Her roommate had unexpectedly backed out, and she was desperately seeking someone to share the rent. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. "I can move in as soon as next weekend," I told her over the phone during my lunch break. "I just need to gather my things and make arrangements." "That would be amazing," Emma replied, relief evident in her voice. "The place is really nice, and splitting the rent makes it totally affordable. Plus, it would be great to live with someone I already know and trust." We discussed logistics briefly before I had to return to work. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. There was a way out of this situation, but I knew I needed to be strategic. If my parents discovered my plans prematurely, they might make my remaining time at home unbearable. Or worse, find some way to sabotage my escape. Over the next 2 weeks, I operated with the stealth and precision of someone planning a jailbreak. I gradually moved my most important possessions to my car trunk, taking items my parents wouldn't immediately notice were missing. I redirected my mail to a P.O. box. I transferred my savings to a new bank account my parents didn't know about, keeping just enough in my original account to avoid suspicion. During this time, I continued fulfilling my duties with Samantha, though with a new perspective. Rather than feeling resentful, I found myself almost pitying her. She was caught in the same manipulative family dynamic, though playing a different role. I began to document her schedule, meticulously noting every class activity, friend's house, and appointment. I researched local after-school programs, tutoring services, and teenage activity centers, compiling a comprehensive list of resources that could replace my supervision. At work, I spoke with my manager about the possibility of working remotely part of the week to accommodate my upcoming move. To my surprise, he was receptive to the idea. "You've been with us for almost a year now, and despite the recent issues, your overall performance has been excellent," he said. "We've actually been considering implementing more flexible work arrangements for the team. This could be a good trial run." This unexpected support bolstered my confidence. With housing secured and my job situation stabilized, I focused on the final pieces of my plan. The hardest part was confronting my feelings about leaving. Despite their recent behavior, these were still my parents, and Samantha, for all her difficult behavior, was still my sister. I spent several nights drafting and redrafting a letter explaining my decision. I wanted to be honest about my reasons for leaving without burning bridges entirely. As the day of my planned departure approached, I experienced moments of doubt. Was I overreacting? Should I try one more time to discuss the situation with my parents? But then, I would remember my mother's phone conversation, the casual way she described exploiting me, and my resolve would strengthen again. The night before my planned exit, I sat at my desk and finalized my letter to my parents. It was direct but not accusatory, explaining that I needed to prioritize my career and independence, and that their expectations had made it impossible for me to do so while living at home. I included the detailed information about Samantha's schedule and the list of alternative care options. I also wrote a separate note for Samantha expressing hope that we might develop a healthier relationship in the future, one based on mutual respect rather than obligation. As I prepared for bed that last night under my parents' roof, I felt a complex mixture of emotions, apprehension about the changes ahead, sadness for the relationship dynamics that had led to this point, but predominantly a sense of relief and even anticipation. For the first time in months, I was taking control of my own life again. "Tomorrow," I whispered to myself as I turned out the light. "Everything changes." I chose a Tuesday for my departure. My parents both had important meetings scheduled, ensuring they would leave early and return late. Samantha had school followed by debate club practice, giving me a solid 8-hour window to execute my plan. I had already arranged to take a personal day from work. Once the house was empty, I moved with efficient purpose. Emma had connected me with a friend who owned a small moving truck, and he arrived promptly at 9 a.m. Together, we loaded my remaining furniture, the bed frame and mattress I'd purchased after college, my desk bookshelf, and the comfortable reading chair that had been a graduation gift from my grandmother. The process went more quickly than I'd anticipated. By noon, the truck was packed, and my childhood bedroom looked strangely bare. I'd left behind the things from my youth, the posters I'd outgrown, old-school trophies, and childhood mementos. These belonged to a version of myself that I was now consciously leaving behind. I did a final sweep of the house, making sure I hadn't forgotten anything important. In the kitchen, I left my house key on the counter alongside the envelope containing my letter. I placed Samantha's schedule and the childcare resource list on top, where they couldn't be missed. After a moment's hesitation, I added the most recent rent check I'd written, covering the remainder of the month. Whatever else happened, I wanted to leave with financial integrity. Standing at the front door, I took one last look around the home where I'd grown up. There were happy memories here, interspersed with the difficult ones. I allowed myself a moment of nostalgia before stepping outside and closing the door firmly behind me. The drive to my new apartment with Emma took about 45 minutes. We arrived just as the moving truck pulled up, and together with Emma and her friend, we unloaded my belongings into my new room. By late afternoon, my bed was assembled, my clothes were hung in the closet, and my books were arranged on the shelf. It wasn't fully organized, but it was functional enough for me to start this new chapter of my life. "Thanks for being so cool about this last-minute move-in," I told Emma as we collapsed onto the living room couch, exhausted from the day's efforts. "I know it wasn't ideal timing." She waved away my concern. "Are you kidding? You saved me from having to interview random strangers from Craigslist? Besides, it sounds like you needed to get out of that situation." I had given Emma a condensed version of recent events with my family, enough for her to understand why I'd needed to move quickly and quietly. "I still feel weird about leaving without saying goodbye in person," I admitted. But I knew if I tried to have that conversation face to face, they would have found a way to make me stay. "You did what you had to do," Emma reassured me. "And you left them a letter explaining everything. That's more consideration than they showed you." As evening approached, I knew my family would be discovering my absence soon. I kept my phone nearby, alternating between dreading its ring and anxiously checking to see if I'd somehow missed a call. The first text came from Samantha, surprisingly. "Where are you? Mom and Dad are freaking out." I responded simply, "I've moved out. There's a letter explaining everything on the kitchen counter." A flood of texts followed, first from Samantha, then from my mother, and finally from my father. The tone evolved from confusion to anger to accusation, with questions about where I was, demands that I return immediately, and eventually attempts at guilt-tripping. "How could you do this to your sister?" my mother wrote. "She relied on you. We gave you everything, and this is how you repay us," came another text. My father's messages were less accusatory but equally pressuring. "Please come home, Melisande. We can work this out as a family." I responded only once with a brief message to all three of them. "I'm safe and well. I need space right now. I've explained my reasons in the letter, and I've provided resources to help with Samantha's after-school care. Please respect my decision." Then I silenced my phone and joined Emma for a simple dinner of takeout pizza in our new living room. We talked about work, mutual friends, and plans for decorating the apartment anything but my family situation. It was a welcome distraction from the emotional turmoil of the day. Later that night, alone in my new bedroom, I allowed myself to fully process the day's events. There was sadness, certainly, and a lingering sense of guilt that I tried to rationalize away. But overwhelming those feelings was an unexpected sense of peace. I had taken control of my own life, set boundaries, and refused to be exploited. It felt like the first truly adult decision I had ever made. The next few days brought a continuing barrage of messages from my family. My mother's texts grew increasingly accusatory, painting me as selfish and ungrateful. My father's took on a tone of disappointment that stung more than I wanted to admit. Samantha's messages were the most surprising, evolving from angry, "You've ruined everything," to plaintive, "I don't know why you had to leave like that," to something approaching vulnerability. The house feels weird without you here. I maintained my distance, responding only occasionally to confirm that I was still alive and well. From snippets of information in their messages, I pieced together the chaos my departure had created. My mother had been forced to take time off work to care for Samantha. My father was scrambling to adjust his schedule. They had contacted several of the childcare services I'd listed, but were shocked at the costs involved. 1 week after my departure, I received a particularly revealing text from my mother. "Do you have any idea how expensive proper childcare is? We can't afford this long term." I allowed myself a moment of vindication. They were finally recognizing the actual value of the service they had expected me to provide for free. 2 weeks in, my father called rather than texted. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Melisande," he said, his voice sounding tired and older than I remembered. "Can we talk? Really talk, not just exchange texts?" "I'm listening," I said cautiously. "What you did, leaving like that, it was a shock." I explained everything in my letter. He sighed heavily. "Reading your perspective in that letter was difficult. Your mother and I, we never intended to exploit you." "What would you call it then?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "You threatened to double my rent unless I provided free childcare that was interfering with my career." There was a long pause before he responded. "When you put it that way, it sounds terrible." "Because it was terrible, Dad." Another pause. "Things have been challenging since you left," he admitted. "We've had to hire someone part-time to watch Samantha, and it's expensive. Your mother had to reduce her hours at work." "I'm sorry it's difficult," I said, meaning it. "But that doesn't mean it was right to put all that responsibility on me." "I know," he said quietly, surprising me. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since you left. I didn't stand up for you when I should have. I let your mother dictate terms that weren't fair to you." His admission was unexpected, and I found myself blinking back tears. "Why?" I asked simply. "It was easier," he admitted with painful honesty. "Easier to go along with her plan than to argue or find another solution. Easier to take advantage of your good nature than to face the real issues with Samantha. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." His apology felt like the first crack in a wall that had been building between us. "Thank you for saying that," I managed. "Would you consider not coming back? I know that's not happening. But maybe having dinner sometime, just to talk." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to maintain the clean break I'd established. Another part recognized that this might be an opportunity to rebuild our relationship on healthier terms. "Maybe," I said finally, "but I need more time first." He accepted this without argument, another sign that perhaps he was genuinely reconsidering his approach. "Take all the time you need. We'll be here when you're ready." After we hung up, I sat on my bed processing the conversation. It wasn't a magical resolution to all the hurt and betrayal I'd experienced, but it was a start. A small acknowledgement that what had happened was wrong, and perhaps the beginning of accountability. The following days brought more developments. Samantha texted that she had been assigned a real babysitter who was super strict and no fun at all. I couldn't help but smile at this inadvertent compliment to my more lenient supervision style. My mother remained largely silent, though my father mentioned she was coming to terms with things in her own way, which I interpreted to mean she was still angry, but dealing with the practical realities. At work, my performance was steadily improving now that I could focus fully on my responsibilities. My manager noted the positive change, and there were whispers of a possible promotion in the next review cycle. My commute was longer from the new apartment, but the freedom and peace I felt when returning home each evening made it worthwhile. Emma proved to be an ideal roommate, compatible in habits, respectful of boundaries, and fun to be around when we both had free time. Our apartment was gradually becoming a home filled with small touches that reflected our personalities and shared aesthetic. 1 month after my departure, I agreed to meet my father for coffee at a cafe halfway between our homes. I arrived early, selecting a table near the window where I could see him approach. When he walked in, I was struck by how much older he looked. There were new lines around his eyes, and his shoulders seemed more stooped than I remembered. "Melisande," he said warmly as he sat down across from me. "It's good to see you." "You too, Dad," I replied, surprised to find I meant it. We exchanged awkward pleasantries about the weather and our health before diving into more substantive conversation. He shared updates about his work and some neighborhood news, carefully avoiding direct mentions of my mother or Samantha. Finally, I asked the question that had been on my mind. "How are things at home, really?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair in a familiar gesture. "Different. Challenging. Your mother had to reduce her hours at work to be home when Samantha gets out of school. We have a sitter 3 days a week, but it's expensive, so your mother covers the other 2 days." "And how's Samantha handling everything?" A small smile appeared on his face. "She's actually shown some improvement. The sitter is a former teacher, very structured in her approach. Samantha complained bitterly at first, but her grades have started to improve." "That's good to hear." He nodded, then looked directly at me. "Melisande, I want to apologize again properly. What I allowed to happen was wrong. We treated you like an employee, not a daughter, and when you quite reasonably objected, we tried to leverage your financial situation to force compliance. It was, there's no other word for it, exploitative." His candor caught me off guard. "Thank you for acknowledging that," I said quietly. "After you left, I did a lot of thinking about how we ended up in that situation. Your mother and I never discussed our expectations clearly when you moved back home. We just gradually increased demands without considering your needs or obligations. It felt like my career and future didn't matter," I admitted, "like I was just a resource to be used." He winced visibly at my words. "That's exactly what we did, and there's no excuse for it. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that it was helping the family that you owed us for raising you. But those were all justifications for something fundamentally unfair." His acknowledgement felt like a weight lifting from my shoulders, validation that I hadn't overreacted or misinterpreted the situation. "What about Mom?" I asked. "Does she see it the same way?" He hesitated. "Your mother processes things differently. She was initially very angry about your leaving, took it as a personal rejection. But having to arrange her own schedule around Samantha has given her a new perspective on what we were asking of you. She's not ready to admit she was wrong, but she's getting there. And Samantha, surprisingly, she misses you. She won't say it directly, but I've caught her looking at old family photos, ones with you in them. I think she took your presence for granted and is only now recognizing what she lost." We continued talking for nearly 2 hours, moving from the painful recent past to cautious plans for rebuilding our relationship in the future. By the time we parted, we had agreed to regular coffee meetings, just the two of us, to continue healing the breach. As I drove back to my apartment, I reflected on how much had changed in just 1 month. I had established my independence, improved my work situation, created a comfortable new living arrangement, and taken the first steps toward a healthier relationship with my father. There was still much unresolved with my mother and Samantha, but for the first time, I felt optimistic that those relationships could also evolve in positive directions, given time and continued boundary setting. The road ahead wouldn't be easy or straightforward. Family dynamics built over decades don't transform overnight. But I had discovered my own strength in this crisis, a capacity to stand up for myself and create the life I deserved, rather than the one others tried to impose upon me. That knowledge, more than anything else, gave me confidence to face whatever challenges lay ahead. 3 months after my abrupt departure from my parents' home life had settled into a new and more satisfying rhythm. My shared apartment with Emma had transformed from a hastily arranged escape hatch into a genuine home with photographs on the walls, plants thriving on the windowsills, and the comfortable lived-in feeling that only comes with time. My commute to work was longer now, but I had turned it into productive time, listening to finance podcasts and audiobooks that enhanced my professional knowledge. The company had recognized my improved performance with a modest raise and increased responsibilities. I was finally building the career I had envisioned when I graduated college. Most importantly, I had reclaimed my sense of autonomy. No longer did I feel like a resource to be exploited or a problem to be managed. I was an independent adult making my own choices and living with their consequences, both positive and negative. My relationship with my father had gradually improved through our regular coffee meetings. We had established a new pattern of interaction, one based on mutual respect rather than authority and obligation. He had become more forthcoming about his own struggles, including his regrets about how he had handled the situation with me and his ongoing challenges with Samantha and my mother. "I should have been stronger," he admitted during one of our conversations. "I knew what we were asking wasn't fair to you, but I took the path of least resistance." "Why?" I had asked, genuinely curious. He had sighed deeply before answering. "Your mother and I have different views on parenting. She believes children owe their parents for raising them, that it's a debt that needs repaying. I never saw it that way. I always felt we chose to have children, so the responsibility was ours, not yours." "But you went along with her plan." "Yes, because I was tired of fighting those battles. It's not an excuse, just an explanation." These honest conversations helped me understand the dynamics that had shaped our family for years, patterns I had sensed but never fully comprehended until now. My relationship with my mother remained more complicated. After nearly 2 months of minimal contact, she had finally reached out with a terse message. "Your father thinks we should talk. I'm willing if you are." Our first meeting had been strained, taking place at the same cafe where I regularly met my father. Unlike him, she showed no immediate signs of having reflected on her behavior. "I don't understand why you had to leave so dramatically," she said almost immediately. "You could have discussed your concerns with us." "I tried, Mom," I reminded her. "Multiple times. You and Dad presented it as an ultimatum, not a discussion." She had frowned, clearly remembering events differently. "We were just trying to solve a family problem. Samantha needed supervision and you were living at home." "For which I was paying rent and helping with household expenses," I pointed out. "I was already contributing fairly." The conversation had continued in this vein, with my mother reluctantly acknowledging some aspects of reality while resisting others. By the end, we had reached an uneasy truce rather than genuine understanding, but it was a start. Subsequent meetings had shown incremental progress. My mother was never going to be the type to offer a heartfelt apology or fully admit wrongdoing, but her behavior had shifted. She no longer made comments about my obligations to the family and had started to treat me more like an adult with my own legitimate priorities. Most surprising was the evolution in my relationship with Samantha. About 6 weeks after I left, she had texted me out of the blue. "The new babysitter is making me do all my homework before I can use my phone. This is torture." I had replied with simple sympathy rather than advice, and somehow this had opened a channel of communication between us. She began texting me regularly about school friends and the various injustices of teen life. I responded with the perspective of someone who cared but wasn't directly responsible for her behavior, a role that seemed to work better for both of us. One Saturday, about 2.5 months after I'd left, she asked if she could visit my new apartment. After checking with Emma, I agreed, and my father dropped her off for the afternoon. The Samantha who arrived at my door seemed different from the sullen, manipulative teen I'd left behind. She was still recognizably herself, assertive, dramatic, occasionally self-centered, but there was a new awareness in her interactions with me. "Your place is nice," she said, inspecting my living room with the critical eye of a 16-year-old. "Smaller than I expected, but cute." "It's all I need," I replied. "And the rent is manageable on my salary." She wandered around examining my books and decorations. "Did you know Mom had to cut her hours at work after you left?" She was super mad about it. "Dad mentioned something about that," I said carefully. Samantha plopped down on my couch. "Yeah, it was chaos for like the first 2 weeks. Mom was crying, Dad was stress cleaning everything, and they kept arguing about who was going to pick me up from school." "That must have been hard for you," I offered, genuinely concerned about how the upheaval had affected her. She shrugged in that performatively casual way teenagers have perfected. "It was whatever. The babysitter they hired is actually okay, just strict about homework and stuff." We ordered pizza and watched a movie together, and as the afternoon progressed, Samantha gradually relaxed. Near the end of her visit, as we were waiting for my father to pick her up, she suddenly asked, "Why did you leave without saying goodbye?" The directness of the question caught me off guard. I was afraid if I tried to say goodbye in person, Mom and Dad would find a way to make me stay. I answered honestly. She nodded, absorbing this. "They were really using you, weren't they? Making you take care of me for free when you had your own job and stuff." Her perception surprised me. "It wasn't a healthy situation," I agreed. "For any of us." "I wasn't very nice to you," she admitted, studying her fingernails intently. "No, you weren't," I confirmed, seeing no reason to sugarcoat it. "I was jealous," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "Mom and Dad always talked about how perfect you were in school and everything. When you moved back home and they started making you take care of me, it was like I finally had some power over you." Her insight into her own behavior was startling. "That's pretty self-aware," I commented. She rolled her eyes. "My therapist pointed it out. Mom and Dad started making me see someone after you left. She's actually pretty cool for an old person." That explained some of the changes I was seeing. "I'm glad you're talking to someone. Family dynamics can be complicated." "Yeah," she agreed. "Dr. Harmon says our parents were parentifying you, making you take on adult responsibilities that weren't yours. She says it's a form of exploitation." I couldn't help but smile at hearing my therapist's terminology coming from my teenage sister. That's one way of looking at it. When my father arrived to pick her up, Samantha surprised me with an awkward hug. "Can I visit again sometime?" she asked. "I'd like that," I told her, meaning it. Over the following weeks, a new pattern emerged. Samantha would visit my apartment every other Saturday. We weren't suddenly best friends, but we were developing a relationship based on choice rather than obligation, and it was healthier for both of us. 1 month later, my mother suggested a family dinner at a restaurant to celebrate my upcoming birthday. I agreed with some trepidation, setting firm boundaries about the duration and conversation topics beforehand. To my surprise, the dinner went relatively well. My mother made only one passive-aggressive comment about my absence from family events, which was a record low for her. My father seemed more relaxed than I'd seen him in years. Samantha was her usual teenage self, alternating between engagement and phone absorption, but without the former hostility. As we were finishing dessert, my mother cleared her throat. "Melisande, I've been doing some thinking." She paused, clearly finding the next words difficult. "The way we handled things when you were living with us, asking you to supervise Samantha while maintaining your full-time job, was unfair." Coming from my mother, this qualified as a profound apology. I nodded, acknowledging her effort. "Thank you for recognizing that." Having to rearrange my own work schedule to accommodate Samantha's needs has been illuminating, she continued. "I didn't fully appreciate the burden we were placing on you." "It's not just about the time," I said carefully. "It was the assumption that my career and independence were less important than everyone else's needs." My mother didn't quite meet my eyes. Yes, well, we've had to make many adjustments since you left. It's been educational. It wasn't a full acknowledgement of the damage done, but from my mother, it represented significant progress. I decided to accept it as the olive branch it was intended to be. As we left the restaurant, my father pulled me aside. "She's trying," he said quietly, "in her own way." "I know," I acknowledged, "and I appreciate the effort." He smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling. "We're all learning, I think. Even Samantha." Indeed, my sister had matured noticeably in the months since my departure. Whether due to therapy, the structure provided by her new after-school caretaker, or simply natural development, she was showing signs of greater responsibility and self-awareness. She still had her moments of teenage drama and self-absorption, but these were now interspersed with glimpses of the thoughtful young woman she was becoming. My own healing process had been aided by therapy as well. I had started seeing a counselor shortly after moving out, wanting professional guidance as I navigated the complex emotions surrounding my family situation. She had helped me recognize unhealthy patterns, set appropriate boundaries, and work through feelings of guilt and obligation that had been deeply ingrained. "What your parents did was a form of financial and emotional manipulation," she had told me during one session. "Your decision to remove yourself from that situation wasn't selfish or disloyal. It was an act of necessary self-preservation." Those words had been enormously validating, helping me weather the times when doubt and familial conditioning threatened to undermine my resolve. Now, 3 months after my midnight escape, I could look back on that decision with confidence. It had been the right choice, not just for me, but ultimately for my entire family. My leaving had forced everyone to confront dysfunctional patterns that might otherwise have persisted indefinitely. My parents had to recognize the actual value of childcare and adjust their expectations accordingly. Samantha had gained a more appropriate caretaking arrangement and begun therapy that was helping her develop emotionally. And I had reclaimed my independence and self-respect. Our family relationships were still works in progress. My mother might never fully acknowledge the wrongness of her actions. My father was still learning to stand firm in his own convictions rather than defaulting to the path of least resistance. Samantha would continue to navigate the turbulent waters of adolescence with all its attendant challenges, and I would need to maintain healthy boundaries while remaining open to genuine connection. But we were all moving forward on healthier trajectories than before. The crisis precipitated by my departure had ultimately been transformative, forcing necessary change that might never have happened otherwise. As I drove back to my apartment after the birthday dinner, I reflected on the journey of the past few months. I had discovered strength I didn't know I possessed, the courage to prioritize my own well-being, even when facing intense pressure to sacrifice it for others. I had learned that genuine love doesn't demand self-erasure or unquestioning compliance. And I had found that sometimes the most loving act, both for yourself and for others, is to say no, and mean it. The road ahead would have its challenges, certainly. Family healing is rarely linear or complete. But I faced that future with newfound confidence in my ability to navigate it on my own terms, maintaining connections without sacrificing my core needs and values. Sometimes the greatest act of love is having the courage to walk away, forcing everyone, including yourself, to confront uncomfortable truths and grow from them. Have you ever had to choose between family obligations and your own well-being? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's essential for healthy relationships. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, prioritizing your own needs isn't selfish. It's the foundation of authentic connection with others.